Hey, this is Lindsay here, and as promised, we're doing the breakdown of every machine from the 2020 450 Shootout, explaining how they finished, where they did, giving you a little bit deeper analysis on the characteristics and a few comments from the test riders about their thoughts on the machines, and also give you guys a little more of like an in-depth look at those riders, a little bit more about their style, and just try to give you guys an idea of why the rankings fall where they did. If you haven't already checked out the Shootout video, I have the main one up on my channel. It's about 13 minutes long. It covers the quicks, ins and outs of each of these machines, kind of a synopsis of the overall Shootout. And like I said though, this breakdown is here just to go in depth on each bike. So this video is all about the Honda. I have videos up on the other bikes. We're almost done with the whole group. Maybe by the time you watch this one, we might have all of them done on each motorcycle, but I'm trying to spend that time for the guys that really want to know what's going on, because hey, I find Shootout to be an important piece, because if you're really looking out and going to buy one of these bikes this year, I want to be able to feed as much information as possible to the consumer, because albeit we had a winner and a loser and finishing positions in between, the winner is not necessarily the bike that's going to suit each rider to a T. It definitely wins because it is the most rounded machine in our regard for characteristics and ends up with the most rounded score. Basically, we have 5 test riders and we all rank them 1 to 6. We tie those results together and the lowest overall score wins. That bike's definitely a good rounded choice, but there are characteristics that are unique to each machine that might suit you better. It might be what you're looking for in a bike, and maybe some of the negatives are things that don't bother you or things that you know you can clean up. When we go over some of the negatives of the bikes, I actually do it towards the end of the video of these individuals, go through maybe some of the things I would recommend changing to try to clean up those little problems or nags of some of the riders involved in the test. But before we jump too deep into it, I want to thank everybody that made the Shootout happen. Shop on Motorsports, go to shopmoto.com for gear, parts, accessory, etc. Punch in the code ML512 at checkout to save on your next purchase. Big thanks to those guys. They support this channel big time. I was able to get the bikes from them, so we were able to privately go out and procure the bikes like a consumer would. These aren't loaners from the OEMs. We were able to get these bikes ourselves and just try to be a little bit more genuine, a little more open to how we go about the Shootout itself. I also did another video before this Shootout, kind of why I bought the bikes and a little explanation on how we went more about the test over the 3 days of testing the different tracks, etc. Also really want to thank Oakley, Fox, and Specialized, big supporters of my channel. Fox and Oakley hooked us up with all of our gear, and of course Oakley for the goggles. Some local companies that helped me fund a little bit of this. Epoxy at SoCal, DCMX Tools, 2 local business owners that are really into moto, both ride a ton. Their Instagram pages are in the description below. If you wouldn't mind, click on them. Give those guys a follow, a shout out, just a little thank you for helping make this thing happen. Also, Works Connection for the stands, Vista Design the graphics, and Dunlop for the tires. They hooked us up with a fresh batch of MX33s for all the bikes, so we had fresh comparable rubber for each machine. It's the most common tire on the market. It just made it a lot easier without the OEM support, not being able to replace each of the OEM-based tires. We went ahead and worked with those guys to just give us a nice baseline for this test. So let's get into it with the Honda CRF450. This bike finished second, so I'm sure a lot of people are going to be interested in this video on, with quite a few changes coming into 20. Of course, this bike was all new back in 17. There was a big change in 19 with the chassis. They really updated pretty much the whole back half of the bike and tried to balance out the flex characteristics of the machine. There's been some big updates to the cylinder head, ignition mapping pipes and stuff along the way. It is now the horsepower king of the class. But now they're really trying to refine the bike. It did okay in Shootout last year. It did really well in some and so-so in others. I think the big thing, it's interesting to tame. The Honda went from that always really easy to ride package. They listened to consumers that were constantly like, we need more, and they're there. Like I said, the bike has a lot of what I consider peak performance, but it's been a little bit of a struggle to set up at times. So with the changes they made to the 20, playing with the mapping even more, adding a torque control system, which we'll get into, more suspension updates, and just other things throughout the bike. You can check that on my first look on the Hondas for more of those details. They've just tried to refine the package, and ultimately it did finish second. The scores for this bike were, across our 5 test riders, a second, a first, a second, a fourth, and a first. So that's 10 points total. The Yamaha was our winner with 7 points, and our third place bike was the Husqvarna with 17 points. So the Honda landed in second with a solid 10. As you can see, it was a contender for most of the guys. Really just a close fight for the first, and like I said, we'll get into kind of where it ultimately didn't quite get that top spot from. So starting with the good of this machine, just kind of the overall broad synopsis. The motor, man, it's a beast. Like I said, biggest performer in the class now in the horsepower ranking. It's taken over from the KTM Husky, above the Yamaha them. It's been up there since last year, and it's still taking the reins this year. The power is very unique. It's a very fast revving engine in the mid-range, and it has an interesting curve. It comes on fairly strong off the bottom. I feel like it almost has a little bit of a flat spot where it starts to taper off, and then the RPMs pick up again and build through the entire range. You'll even notice it. We're going to post some dyno chart stuff from later this week, but there is this little bit of a flat spot and a hit, but it's really aggressive power characteristic, and it's just got a lot of it in so many places. That was kind of one of the main things the guys liked about the bike. When you're just looking at pure power output, when the track's smooth in the morning, when things are great, man, it's fun because it's so playful on the engine because of how quick the rev characteristic is from the mid-range on, the amount of bottom it has, the amount of top it has. It's a very fun bike to ride aggressively if you can control that power. The power itself, though, was for some of the riders a little bit of the issue. When you're just doing sprints, when you're fresh, it's great. Long run distance, long motos, it can be a bit much to hang on to, and partially I think it is the hit, the dip to the hit again can make it kind of interesting to control, and it depends where you ride at RPM wise. If you really short shift the bike, you'll probably stay below that RPM change, and if you ride really high in the RPM, you also stay above it. Me personally, where I ran into a little bit of a struggle is I ride a little more through the middle of the range into the upper, so I was riding through where I felt that taper change was in the RPM. And it caught me off guard a little bit on jump faces, places where it just felt like it would surge a little bit. Yeah, in soft conditions, it's super fun because of how quick responding the power is. Makes the bike feel extremely playful. Now, the torque control is interesting. It's somewhat of a similar system to what some of the OEMs have used, where it's not true traction control. You don't have wheel speed sensors. It's all based off of the RPM of the engine. It has parameters to pick up how quick the RPMs are gaining to know if it's making maybe power a little too quickly, if we've got some tire spin. And basically the parameters of the torque control, which the Honda's always had a 3 map selector. Now you have 3 selectors of the torque control. It can either be off on 1, 2, or 3. And that's going to catch, based on that torque build, how much it's going to restrict power at certain points. There's, like I said, a lot of parameters based on how quick the RPM is building, where the throttle position is, etc. For me, on last year's bike, I rode it on map 2, which was the smoothest, the most broad power. I tried that a little bit on this bike, and it was better for me, but still that taper spot of the RPM change was a little bit much. So I played with all the mapping. Didn't really like map 3, the most aggressive one. I really didn't find anybody in the test that liked it. Everybody was bouncing back and forth between the standard map and map 2. Map 2 is a little bit mellower off the bottom. It has a little more fuel, so it feels like it pulls better up top. But like I said, there's still that quick RPM build in the middle. The torque control, based on what version it's in, it kind of restricts that the torque control can kind of restrict that RPM build. And for me, the perfect combination was map 1 on the ECU side and map 2 on the torque control side. I felt like it kept the RPMs in check a lot better. That kind of quick taper build was a little bit more spread out. It didn't ramp up too fast in places, so I felt like up jump faces, the roll on character of the throttle, how the engine picked up was a little bit more consistent, easier to estimate how it was going to put down the power and how much at what point. So I found that quite useful. The riders that did go through and tried the torque control liked both the first and second versions, depending upon their style. And a lot of them commented that, I think a lot of us thought it'd be a little more gimmicky, like maybe the traction control found on the KTM Husky. Not to say that they aren't useful, just not a lot of riders find a situation where they like them unless it's pure slicks and snotty out. This system actually seemed to be pretty usable in a lot of areas we went to. So yeah, like I said, the power output is huge on the bike. That can be good. It can also kind of bite you in the back end at times. But really the torque control was actually a nice addition that a lot of us found really good use in. Moving over to the ergonomics, this is where the big praise always comes for the Honda. Just that really even feeling rider triangle between foot peg, seat height to handlebars. They went to a little bit lower bar last year and finally updated from a 7/8 to a 1/1/8 fat bar for the Renthal. But still, even with that bar change, every rider comments from the tall to the small side, it just feels like one of the most even bikes in the class. It doesn't feel like anything's too out of place. Yes, the tall guys would probably tweak on their bar bend a little bit, smaller guys a little bit, but none of us really had a standout issue in that zone, and that's why I think Honda's always been really well known for, is that rider triangle, feeling very even, very easy to adapt to, and regardless of how much they change their chassis characteristics from generation to generation, there is kind of a thing where you sit on and go, man, you know, it feels like a Honda. And man, it could be black, it could be white, it could be blue, but with the numbers they use together, it just has this nice neutral feel. A little racier maybe than what they've had in the last couple generations because of the slightly lower bar. It gets you a little more tucked down on the bike. For me as a smaller guy, it definitely helps. I felt like the old Ben they had 2 years ago was always a little tall for me. I felt a little upright in the seat, so I definitely like the rounded character of this better. The overall seat profile is very easy to move about on. The shroud profile is very good. Head pipe hangs out a little bit with the guard. If you kind of roll your leg up slowly low, you'll feel catch a little bit, but not too bad. And then Honda's done a lot of work with the tapers of the can. Since they went to the dual pipes, if you lean back, you could feel your legs kind of open up a little bit as you go along the side plates. But on this generation specifically, they've worked really hard on the way the can tapers to try to keep those side plates pretty thin and have a good roll characteristic so it doesn't feel that fat as you slide back on the motorcycle. Another big change for this year is, you know, the weight is what it is. It's like the only bikes heavier in the class now are the Yamaha and the Suzuki. I believe they sit with wet weight around 248, 247 each. This bike sits about 245. They've lowered the battery in the bike. They've gone to a lower battery tray, which is something I believe they did with the race team last year, just trying to lower the center of mass. The overall characteristic of the bike as we move into the chassis comments is everybody but feels like this bike is extremely playful, and that's what makes it fun. Really exciting bike in the mornings when the track's fresh because of all that power and how playful and responsive the chassis is. It just feels like such a flickable 450. Not necessarily the lightest at times, not necessarily the heaviest, but just easy to also control with your body. Doesn't ever feel like it's fighting you too much in those situations. But moving over to the chassis characteristic, 2 years ago in the 2019, so last year they stiffened, like I said, the back half of the chassis. They had what I would consider a little bit stiffer front half before, a little bit softer back end, so the rear used to wallow, not feel as precise. By stiffening the back half of the chassis, they kind of spread the energy load across it better, and it has a really unique characteristic. It's got great front end bite. It's right up there in the competitiveness with the Suzuki for pure turn-in response. I think a lot of guys would agree the overall roll character of this bike can be better than some in the class. It's got that great turn-in response. It's very good mid-corner to exit. It has great grip and great response, whether you're turning it from the front end or rear steering it with all that power on exit. Now, where it does get interesting is the sensitivity of the chassis, and this is where the bike starts to have some flaws. Especially going track to track, a lot of riders noticed this was the bike they had to play with setup the most, and the same setup kind of consistencies weren't working from track to track. If you do, for instance, on a bike with a bit softer chassis like the Cowie or the Yamaha, you do a 2-3 millimeter sag change, it's noticeable, but it's not drastic. On the Honda, you do 1 millimeter sag or a 1 millimeter fork height change, it's a big difference. You go another millimeter and it could be good, or it could actually go the wrong way really quick. So it's a very sensitive bike to get set up balance wise, and everybody seemed to like something a little bit different. Personally, I went to forks flush. I believe they're 5 mil up stock. Some riders were there, some were in between. I ended up having to go all the way out to get the stability I wanted of the bike. I wanted a longer feeling bike overall because it does feel like a very short, compact motorcycle. The stock axle block position is pretty far back. If you were able to get your hands on half links, you can push out even farther. That's something, of course, we don't have for Shia because it's not available off the showroom floor. So the fork height was sensitive, and the sag was kind of different between all the riders. I think the base point we started at was 106. A few guys tried a millimeter or two higher than that, a few millimeter or two lower. It seemed a lot of people were leaning towards lower. But like I said, just overall, the characteristics itself of the chassis are well liked in the handling department. It's just extremely sensitive track to track, and I just noticed across our riders, not a lot of us had consistency in what setups we were running. And also those changes tracks to track were interesting. For me, across 3 tracks we rode, the first one, Kahia, it was a very low ranking bike for me. I couldn't get the chassis balance I needed and couldn't get rid of the nervousness. That track doesn't have a lot of big chop. It has a lot of like stuttery sections as you're always turning. So I need the bike to feel like it's planted on the ground. I can trust it. And I always felt like it was just a little nervous and it reacted too much to the surface, whatever was found on the surface of the track. So I was kind of pushing out through those sections instead of being able to hold the line I wanted. As we moved into tracks with deeper braking zone, more stuff to plant on. The bike felt better. Ultimately, Glen Helen, for me, this was the bike that I had some of the biggest changes on. I had lowered the torque setting on the swing arm pivot. I felt like the rear was just too rigid and too reactive to ruts with hard sidewalls. I felt like the bike basically like ping-ponged in the ruts back and forth. Stock is 66 foot-pounds. I dropped it all the way to 58, which helped under acceleration feel, helped for comfort overall, but it was enough of a change, once again back to being this bike being sensitive. On downhills, it would get very loose, and under certain heavy loads, like going down a hill that G-down went up another jump face, I would feel the rear snap energy and try to come out from around me in unexpected times. So I ultimately landed on a torque setting in between with 62 foot-pounds. It kept it more precise and stable, but I also got more comfort than I did stock. I was out on, I believe, high-speed compression, a little faster on rebound, trying to get a little more plushness out of the rear end. The bike was interesting because of the power it outputs. It feels like a lot of times it rides high in the stroke, but the power is so aggressive and the geometry of the chassis, it also seems to suck down really quick under power. So I was trying to balance, get more comfort without letting the sag or the shock just squat too much and start to pack in the stroke. So the faster rebound helped a lot. And a couple of us tried a lot faster rebound on the fork as well. I think myself and Zack Petty specifically, Zack ended up like 5 or 6 clicks faster in stock. I tried 3 to 4, and that was a big difference because the fork felt very dead. Good initial feel, but just would get deep in the stroke and lose comfort because it would pack down and not have a lot of response. And back to the chassis sensitivity, that's what's interesting is I feel like to get this bike extremely level to the point that it doesn't pitch a lot from front to rear, it kind of needs to be a little bit stiff and also a little bit dead, so when both ends sink down, neither tries to come back up too quickly. But to get the comfort I needed on rough tracks, I had to go softer and faster on rebound, and this chassis seems to plant so much energy to each end, the bike would start to what I would call teeter-totter. It was just kind of a little pitchy front to rear, which for my style of riding isn't too big of a problem. I'm willing to give up some stability of the bike from forward to aft motion if I can get some of the comfort back. I'm able to move around the bike in the way I want to, especially with the comfort of the ergonomics, to let it move around a little more that direction to get the comfort and not feel like the bike is stepping out side to side. A couple other little things we noticed about the bike. A lot of guys compliment the front brake on this one. You know, the Brembos on the KTM and Husky for a long time have gone all the praise in the front brake department. Honda last year updated the master cylinder, or sorry, the caliper on this bike to match more what the factory Nissan uses, or setup is, where the piston sizes are actually different. The leading edge piston where the rotor is traveling into is smaller, and the exiting piston area is larger, and it applies more of an even brake pressure on the disc. It has very good feels to the fingers. It's very progressive, very usable, easy to modulate, and a lot of power with the larger brake rotor sizes they're using these days. So brake size good. Clutch is a little weak overall on the bike, especially for the power output. It's very easy to blow through if you're a clutch abuser. And then another problem we ran into, a few people have been commenting on, I've seen privately owning these bikes, is we definitely burnt through coolant on this bike. We had to exit the bike quickly. It was very hot in California when we tested this last couple weeks. Of course, we were in the first week of August doing this test. Every day we rode was well over 100 degrees. 1 or 2 days, we even had an odd amount of humidity for SoCal. So we just noticed we were putting more coolant in this bike than anything else that we tested by a notable amount at the end of each day. So definitely the power output, it tends to run a little bit hotter, it seems like, overall. So now we're going to talk a little bit about these individual rankings and kind of give you an idea of where everybody placed it to finish up there. So as I said, the bike sits with a 2, 1, 2, 4, 1 scores. I'm going to go through and tell you which each rider ranked it, and we're going to get into some of these riders' individual comments. So Jeff Walker, Honda Nut, races Hondas. He actually did give it second overall. We'll get into some of his comments. He placed it second. Zack Petty placed it first. Derek Caskey placed it second. I personally placed it fourth. And Maddox Oda placed it first. In Jeff's case, like I said, rides Hondas. Zack Petty's case, rides a Honda, currently was on Yamahas before, so we had one Honda-owned rider rank it first. My other rider that owns a Honda, Derek Caskey, did rate it second in its base form. Maddox Oda, who currently rides Suzuki's, did rate it first out of the box, and then, like I said, myself fourth. I ride a little bit of everything. Sorry, we're doing a little bit of scrolling here trying to find Jeff Walker's comment, maybe a little bit too much back and forth texting, but here we go. Like I said, second for the Honda. The good, fire-breathing Dragon. The motor is insanely fast and it has insane output. The bike is very confidence-inspiring over jumps and coming into rough corners. The fairly rigid chassis makes it easy to charge in softer dirt. It has a very playful geometry. It's easy to flick around despite its weight. Once again, not saying that the bike feels light. I definitely think you have those moments where you feel the weight of the motorcycle, but it's very easy to manipulate. And in his case, he set a very fast lap time on the motorcycle. Loves the ergonomics overall. The bad, too powerful and harder surfaces, hard to modulate the power. Also bad, chassis rigidity makes it deflect and buck on hard packed tracks, hard to get the motorcycle to settle. Still has front end twitchiness under heavy decel, loses coolant every moto, and Jeff wasn't a fan of the stock handlebar bend. I forgot to ask him why. I think it's a little too low and a little too much sweep for his taste personally. Up next, Maddox Oda, once again ranked at first, currently rides a Suzuki. Chassis balance, or sorry, not balance, sorry, the chassis characteristics, very good. Smooth action for suspension for him. I think he likes his stuff a little more stiff, a little more dead feeling. He likes something, I think, that just feels like it's a little more stuck to the ground, a little less movement. So he was really happy with that overall feel. Love the power output. He's somebody I think that can ride the bike on either end. I hear him really short shift 450s, really rev it. So I think he's able to use it on both ends of the power band. Was really happy with that overall. The bad point though is the bike was rigid and tired you out a little more than most of the bikes in the class. So once again, just the rigidity of the chassis makes it a little bit more sensitive. I think just how it wears you out over the course of a moto. Those were some of Maddox's comments. Derek Caskey, who rated it second and is a self-proclaimed Honda nut. I think that's all he's owned for the last 15 years or something like that. Pros, awesome motor, great output. Derek's definitely somebody that does not rev a 450 really good with that low to mid, so I think he really likes the grunt. Like I said, the roll-on this thing is extremely strong. I don't think it's as crisp as some other bikes, but it's just really, really got great grunt off the bottom. Really good for him because I know he's a little more of a point and shoot kind of guy. He was a big fan of traction control. I actually know he went out to buy the parts because he has a 19. He went out and got an updated ECU and the new torque control. That part of the wiring harness, he got all that set up on his bike because he was once again a big fan of running a combination of map and traction controls torque controls that really made the power suit his needs. Cons for him, I think same as everybody else, like pros for him, definitely a big fan of the cockpit area, of the overall ergonomics. Like I said, big Honda guy, so it feels at home to him. Cons though, even though the suspension is a lot better, the bike is still extremely balance sensitive and very setup sensitive from track to track. So there guys, spend enough time with it to know that's kind of the drawback from track to track, is kind of chasing those settings a little bit. And then moving over to Zack Petty, once again our guy who gave first place, currently rides a Honda. Big fan of the power output overall. Same comment about just a little bit hard to use in certain sections. I think he was a big fan of torque control as well, just being able to dial in the power where he needed to be. Said chassis input, once again, the precision of the chassis was a big plus for him. The overall handling characteristic. Negative was the dead feel of the bike. Like I said, he was going a lot faster on rebound on both ends. He said really had to work to maintain balance of the bike and try to get it into a comfortable position. But overall, setting-wise, he made some really drastic changes to the bike, even more than I did, and it seems like ultimately he was able to find a setting that he was happy with. Petty is at about 150 pounds, 5'7", kind of the smallest guy in the group. So by going softer, a lot faster in rebound, he was able to find a setting he liked. I kind of missed some of the other riders on the weight thing. I say it in all the videos, but I'll backtrack. Derek's Caskey is my biggest guy. He's like my vet novice, 40-plus novice guy. 190 pounds or so, 6'1", just an overall, really do kind of the big boot size, big glove size, just a, big dude, period. Not hefty, just big built. Jeff Walker, as we've all seen, of course, national supercross level rider. About 6'1", high 160 pound range. When we started, it's a very lanky build, especially kind of a short torso, a lot of legs. Also moving over, then we have Maddox Oda, who's definitely kind of my local B rider, top 5 B kid here in California. He's about 5'10", a little bit of a stockier build, but been leaning out. He's still in the high 160 pound range. And then myself, I'm like 5'9", right about 160, short arms and legs, mostly torso. So a little bit of balance, weight range of about 40 pounds difference between the group of us. 2 pro level riders, I'm off their pace by a little bit. I don't know what to label myself. Like local A, we got a really fast B kid, and then we have our 140 novice. I know a few people have commented about more vet guys. I actually had a plan originally. There was supposed to be 2 more in this test, but short time constraints, just conflict of schedules. We kind of lost 2 of them just at the last minute. So definitely something as we continue to do these shootouts in the future, there will be more emphasis put on a wider scale and range of riders. Definitely want to be able to get, once again, the most info out to you guys as possible when we're doing these kinds of tests. So, like I said, I think we can just talk about the bike in a base characteristic. Power output, strong, a little hard to handle, but there are definitely some options in the mapping to clean it up. Chassis is extremely precise. A lot of guys like the handling characteristics and the playfulness of it. Great ergos. Just a very sensitive setup, very sensitive chassis. I think that's ultimately what cost its win to the Yamaha. Is the Yamaha was the bike that at our shootout, I think the only thing that messed with is once we set sag for riders was a little bit ergo position stuff, some bar stuff. You can hear about that by clicking on that video. And just some very minor fork changes. I don't think anybody ever touched a shock setting on it. And it was a bike that all 3 tracks we rode was just very easy to jump on and feel comfortable and put in good times and feel like you could charge on. The Honda was close to that. I know a lot of riders were, like I said, kind of fighting back and forth on why to place it where they did. And ultimately, when it came down to talking about long run pace on the bike, ease of setup track to track, and just kind of the overall experience, when you weigh the good and the bad, it was just a tick off the Yamaha. I actually honestly think in a lot of cases the Honda has higher peak performance possibly than any bike in this class. I think it has some of the most potential, but I also feel like it actually, it's between it and the Suzuki, and I actually lean a little more towards Honda, might have the narrowest, what I would call, window of operation. So you have to change those settings more to adapt to the track layout, to some of the materials. If you have consistent material in there, ride kind of the same batch of tracks, I think it's very easy to get your notes dialed in on the bike and find that setup that will suit you, working maybe with your local suspension guy. I do think where the bike would struggle a little bit is somebody that's riding a wide range of tracks, likes to travel and ride the bike a lot in different situations. You might struggle a little bit more with it. Myself personally, of course, some people might give a little crap because I gave it the lowest score at 4th. Thought about it a lot. For sure, the Yamaha was the easy win for me this year. It was definitely tight between my next 3, Cowie, Husky, Honda. And it was, the Cowie is a clear-cut second for me. It was between this and the Husky, and what really came down to was I struggled the most out of the riders, I think, with that setup. Even though I would play with stuff more each day, I just didn't feel as comfortable overall on the machine. Just an aftermarket ACU like a Vortex, a really well-tuned one with a reputable tuner, can really clean up, get a little bit crisper throttle response, get a little bit of a cleaner roll on, and then get you through a couple of the fluctuations in the power band a little bit cleaner, because there's plenty of output there. I just think it can be tuned into a more usable overall package. And I think that'll help some of the setup issues, some of the rear squat issues, that power comes on a little bit cleaner. It won't fluctuate the energy through the chassis as much. And I think it'll calm a lot of things down. Like I said, just really working on the setup, finding the balance you want out of it, working with a good suspension tuner to get a setting that works for you, that maybe gets the comfort you need out of it or is able to maintain the balance. I'm a big proponent, of course. I've mentioned on here multiple times. I part own a company called Works Chassis Lab. We did all the engine mounts for the MCR Honda team. We've done stuff for Factory Cowie, Star Racing, Hep Suzuki, Bowers. I could keep going. We have plenty of Honda 450 guys. We have different mounts for the top to try to get more torsional flex, try to get a little more comfort out of the chassis. Different front mounts to try to improve brake stability and try to get rid of some of the twitchiness and dive feel. I think those really help out on this bike a ton. Like I said, power-wise, pipes can move around the power bit. I haven't tested them all on this. I feel like the stock Yosh cleans it up quite a bit. The Akrapovic I rode cleans it up a lot as well. I really liked both those pipes the last time I got to go through and do an exhaust comparison on this machine, albeit that was on a 18 version of the bike. I think a decent clutch upgrade is probably needed if you do any kind of usual clutch action you're riding, unless you're like me. If you're really off the clutch all the time, you should be fine. But if you're even a moderate user, definitely going to want to upgrade to somebody else's like clutch pack, maybe a little bit better inner hub so it doesn't notch up, and just something that isn't going to have as much fade through the motos. I said the brakes are really good. Just working on the balance and calming down the power would be really huge on this machine overall. So I think we've seen it, plenty of guys doing good at nationals. The power output is there, just getting it more calmed down, a little bit plusher, because it's really on that knife edge, I think, of being that pro race machine. And honestly, that's not most of the guys out there. So just dialing it back a notch or two in a couple places, I think can make this a really good package for a lot of guys. So that's what we have to say about the Honda. If you have any further questions, any setup questions, anything like that, please throw them in the comment section below. I try to get to all of them across all the videos. I think, I don't know, we've probably answered something like 400 questions in the last couple of days, but continue to do so if you have them. Check out, like I said, some of the brands that support us. Hit some follows. Check out Works Chassis Lab if you get a second on Instagram. Give them a follow. I would really appreciate that. Check out my Patreon if you got a minute. I've got some cool prizes in there for supporters. And I understand everybody has $1 or $2 to give every month. So if you don't, just hit subscribe, hit like on the video. That really helps us a lot and be able to continue to create this content. We're just about wrapped up with all this 450 shootout content, and we're going to move into the 250 shootout here pretty soon. I'm starting to sell off this bikes this next week and start to gather the 250s so we can get those broken in and move into our next testing cycle.